Hi, everyone. My name is Zara, and this is Tech and EdTech. In this podcast, we discuss technology that powers education and improves learning for all. Welcome to today's episode, where we're going to be shining the spotlight on student safety, a topic that's top of mind for administrators, educators, and parents alike. Our guest for today is Phil Selton, CEO of Lockdown Experts. As a law enforcement executive with the FBI, Phil has held leadership positions focused on counterterrorism and incident response. His extensive background in counterterrorism, risk assessment, and emergency planning affords him a unique understanding of security protocols and emergency response strategies. Welcome to the show, Phil. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, Zara, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today about a subject that I feel very passionate about, and that's about how we make schools safer for our children. So this hopefully will be an interesting discussion, and I look forward to answering some of your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So given this extensive background, I'm super curious, and I think our listeners would be really interested to understand what led you into this important work of student safety.
Well, I mean, I think it's, I share the concern of many people, first of all, that are watching the rising number of violent incidents in schools. And that's been going on, unfortunately, for a long period of time. And when I was in the FBI, I had the misfortune of having to watch video of what happened during some of these active shooter situations. And, that type of thing stays with you. And you want to figure out, what can we do to make schools safer? What can we do to make students safer? And frankly, some of this stuff would apply outside of schools, but for today, we're just talking about schools. So that's kind of how I came into this field.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, someone with your background, I'm sure it's much appreciated in a lot of the school systems that you work with. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Lockdown Experts and what key problem or gap that you're trying to solve at schools.
Sure. As we talked about before, I was the FBI, and had a senior role in working on counterterrorism cases, and I alluded to the fact that I unfortunately had to watch videos showing what happened in schools and other violent incidents. And the reason for that was, at the time, we would try to figure out if a foreign terrorist organization was involved in any of these incidents, which was my main role. And we would initially review the videos and other evidence that came in. And in many cases, it turned out that it didn't involve foreign terrorist organizations, but I still, unfortunately, had to look at these things and think continually about what could have been done differently. So Lockdown Experts is a company, and I think we're going to probably talk a little bit more about it, but is a company that was founded in order to try to save lives, to learn from what happened in the past, both from survivors of active shooter incidents, as well as to allow first responders to be able to get to the scene faster, to be able to save lives, and to take advantage of technology that is readily available. And I think we're going to be talking a little about fire alarms, but we're used to using technology to save lives, and everybody kind of takes it for granted because fire alarms and systems that suppress fires have been around for 70, 80 or more years, and they actually work. And we're used to those. So the question is, why can't we do something similar for active shooter situations?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that was one of the questions I had. Was a lot of us, right, grew up with these fire drills. You heard an alarm, you lined up quietly, you walked outside to your designated spot. But it was a little bit more routine. Like, I feel like I remember it being a great break from class rather than thinking about it as an emergency. But today's is obviously a very different situation. And my own experience recently hit home. My daughter, who's not even in grade school yet, attends a daycare in an elementary school. And a few weeks ago, they had their first lockdown drill. And she came home. She said, they played a game where they hid under a teacher's desk, and that everyone was really brave. They got a lollipop. It was both heartbreaking and eye-opening to hear this, from a 2-year-old. So, yeah, I mean, all that to get to how these lockdown situations are so much more different. It's such a different level of decision making and coordination than a fire drill. So, yeah, maybe you can speak a little bit more to how the lockdown ALL system supports school leaders and staff to make these decisions quickly during a crisis.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you were alluding to earlier, and we briefly talked about fire alarms, but I think we kind of take for granted that, and you and I have probably been through the same thing, and all the professionals that work in schools right now. As we grew up, we got used to, you'd have a fire drill, depending on what the school was, maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter, or whatever the regulation of the school was. And we learned that the fire alarm would go off. We were taught to don't panic, just stand up calmly, walk out the door, walk down the stairs, don't run, and go to a predetermined assembly area. And the
Hmm.
reason why we started doing that was that we learned that that's how you save lives. That between fire alarms and sprinkler systems, smoke detectors, which are newer, thermal detectors, maybe, we have all these advanced systems now that save lives in the event of a fire. And if you look back, what's interesting is if you look back, you realize that there really haven't been I think it's been in the 1950s was the last time a significant number of people were killed in a fire in a school. And the reason is that we have these technologies that have been around for a long time, and they actually work. So, our students and our society is used to using technology, of course, to try to save lives. So, per your point, the evolution is okay. What are we doing about active shooter situations that they keep happening? They're clearly
Hmm.
killing a lot more people, unfortunately, than fires are when we look at schools. So, what is the right answer going to be? And I think that's what you're talking about, like what kind of technology we can use.
Yeah, absolutely. Typically we talk in terms of technology, usually, on this podcast and others, we talk about ed tech in the context of learning outcomes, but it's also about empowering educators. So, yeah, how are you seeing the role in technology play in enhancing school safety and emergency preparedness? Be curious as far as how this approach with using technology has adapted with leaders in school districts, and maybe you have a more recent example of it making an impact.
Well, I think that we just, we have to accept the fact that unfortunately we are going to need to start spending money, and every school needs to have some technology. And obviously, some of it's dependent on what the budget of the school is, but in order to be able to save lives in active shooter situations, and those can take many different forms, and some of them are pretty obvious, like controlling access points and trying to keep doors locked and keep people coming in through side doors.
Hmm.
But the answer I think is that we need to really think through, as school administrators spend money, what's the right way to spend money, or what's a potential outcome of what I'm accomplishing. So, for example, there's a lot of focus on metal detectors, and of course, metal detectors are used in many government buildings and other important buildings to for safety, to try to keep people out with guns or other weapons. But we also have to understand the potential limitations of those if we think those are the only line of defense, because you have to make sure you have complete control of all the access points, which in a school is very difficult to do, to prevent someone coming in through a door where there isn't a metal detector. And another thing to think about, I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, is but what happens when someone does come in with a gun that gets picked up in a metal detector? Are the personnel at that location specifically going to be prepared to deal with that situation? And then once again, even if we do have all those items in place, all the appropriate security measures in place, you still have to assume that somebody might get in and bypass a metal detector or whatever other security measures you put in. There's all kinds of other ways to potentially detect guns. Maybe you're searching people as they come in, or whatever it might be. Or you might have things in a school, like there are other technology events. But what do you do when someone actually gets through with a gun, and what are your options? And that gets back to, I just want to revisit a fire alarm again. You could have the most advanced building that has the most advanced fire suppression systems, thermal detectors, smoke detectors, doors that close automatically, uh, all kinds of other advanced technology, to include making sure that the walls are fireproof, so they will withstand a certain amount of fire for a period of time to save lives. But you still always are required by code to have a fire alarm, because that is the backup that everybody knows that they can fall back on. So as we look at what type of technology we're putting in schools, I think we have to really take a step back and just make sure that, are they really foolproof, and really nothing is completely foolproof, but some technologies are better than other technologies. So as we discuss the technology that we want to use related to active shooter situations, we've already alluded to fire alarms and how everybody knows how to use them and how they're highly reliable. But statistically, we know that fires are just not a threat in schools anymore. They haven't been a threat in a long time. It's also worth pointing out or emphasizing again that fire alarms create exactly the wrong reaction. We're telling people to calmly leave the school, walk slowly down the stairs, and go to a predetermined assembly area. And we're also notifying the fire department that there's a potential fire within the building. We want an active shooter alarm to do something very different, which is tell people to either lock their doors or run as fast as they can out of the school. In addition, we want to notify the police, not the fire department, that there's an active shooter situation, and we want to tell the police where the alarm was activated so they can respond there as quickly as possible and have an idea of where the shooting maybe occurred. Finally, we want to provide a lot of situational awareness about what's going on in the building so the police can respond more effectively. And all these things are not done by a fire alarm. So we really do need to look at upgrading our technologies to address what is really the larger threat facing our students.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a lot of really good points, and there's so many different challenges and things that administrators have to think about. And, you know, administrators aren't innately like safety experts, which is, why they consult with someone like you to help them with this preparedness. But I imagine it can be such an overwhelming decision. Do we go with metal detectors? Do we what are these certain safety protocols that we should be making? And also just thinking about all these worst case scenarios. You just talked us through, like, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? There's so many different decision trees that administrators have to make with everything they're doing. So, like, what would you say to administrators to help them plan in a practical way about some of these equipment needs and policies and drills without it becoming this overwhelming thing? And you brought up some of the challenges, like budget. It's a different, we wouldn't want administrators just to have budget challenges to try and make their school as safe as possible.
Well, I mean, I think first of all, some of it's just taking a step back before technology. Some of it has to do with making sure, and hopefully most schools have this by now, but unfortunately there are instances where perhaps it hasn't been done as effectively as it could be. But every school and every school district needs to have a good SOP in place, a standard operating procedure, so everybody knows here's what happens when an active shooter situation occurs, and that includes the administration of the school system. It's obviously that's got to be coordinated with the police department, and it should be a predetermined set of things that occur. And if you don't have one in place, you probably need to have an expert come in and review that. And that expert, by the way, could be a consultant, could be somebody like me, could be a local police department that may be perfectly capable of handling that SOP review. But need to that SOP needs to be set up well, and because no matter what system you have in place, what technology you're using, you need to make sure that you understand what the protocol is. And then, of course, the second important thing, which is kind of interrelated to the SOP, is there has to be training. So everybody from the administration to the students need to be trained on here's what happens when there's an active shooter situation. I think that's becoming more prevalent throughout school systems because they're recognizing this is a significant threat. But it's worth checking, are the SOPs correct? And is what we're teaching students correct? And that's something that's worthy of definitely some analysis. But our thought has changed a little bit as time has gone by. There used to be a period in time where we would say just lock the doors, and there, by the way, I want to emphasize that point. There is a lot of benefit to locking a door in the sense that in almost every school shooting, and I believe 100% of school shootings, actually, no one's ever broken down a door, because if the door is locked, people walk through, the shooter is walking around, and he or she is just going to go on to the next door because that's the mentality that they're in. So locking doors has some merit. But conversely, if you can get out of the building, and if you see a clear path, then you need to run out of the building as fast as possible. And that's in most training. So our thoughts about what we need to do have evolved over time. But then the next step is to make sure that our technology, whatever technology we have, is integrated into the standard operating procedure, is integrated into our training, of course, for the students, and is also integrated with the first responders so that it works effectively. The first responders know what to expect when they get to a school, and they're able to more effectively save lives. So what we know about school shootings and other active shooter situations outside of schools are, unfortunately, in some instances, some people may get killed because they happen to be standing right next to the shooter. But the way to save lives is, first of all, to give the individuals, the students, more time to try to survive that. So to create space or to lock doors between the student and the shooter, and of course to have first responders know where the shooter is and respond more effectively and get there faster, because that's what's going to save lives in the end, or those two events. So to pivot to a little, just talking a little about the alarm that Lockdown Experts is building, which we're proud of the fact we have 22 patents around it, and we actually have another patent pending. But basically, the concept is we know fire alarms work. Fire alarms, as we talked about already, have a proven
Mhm.
history of saving lives, and our society is also very used to them. So our alarm, is an oversimplification, is simply building a fire alarm for active shooter situations. And that is critical because, if, as we talked about, there's many different technology things that could be put in place, and some of them add value. Some of them, I think, maybe are a little debatable as to whether they're actually worth the amount of money we're spending to try to save lives. But in the end, we have to be worried about that incident where somebody gets a gun into a school and starts shooting. And what do we know is an ultimate, relatively simplistic backup? But that's the ability for somebody who sees a gun or somebody who sees someone shooting, presses a button, and the alarm goes off, and everybody in the building knows that they should lock down or run out of the building, and the police know that there's an active shooter situation occurring at that building, and they can respond to the appropriate place within the building as fast as possible. I mean, these are all critical things to saving lives, and that at the core is what Lockdown Experts is working on. Hope that was a long answer to
No, I mean,
the question.
really important. I kind of want to repeat some of that back to you just to kind of reinforce some of this, that I'm coming away with the right outcomes here, and our listeners are here too. So, kind of the first steps in your analysis would be, making sure that the school system or the district has an SOP, a standing operating procedure in place. So work with them on just making sure all the protocols, and you would think that's pretty standard, but I imagine there's lots of different forms of it at this point. So nailing down the standard operating procedures, making sure once you have that in place, having the training for all admin staff, students, so they know what to do in every situation. Um, and then the technology that kind of enhances all of these things and integrated that into their system, making sure first responders know what to do, and kind of making it as efficient, I guess, as possible, right?
Yes, exactly. And then having that and understanding that no matter what the technology is, unfortunately, there is a chance that you're going to have an actual shooting occurring. So, what layering, make sure you have the appropriate technology to handle that situation also, which is kind of part of what we've already talked about.
And so, as far as the technology adoption, like what are some of the challenges or hesitations that you find with leaders when they're making these kind of decisions?
Well, that's a good question. That's a really good question, and I do understand the issues that people have in making these selections, and these are real issues that I think maybe some people out in the public might not understand, but understanding the things that educators and other decisions make. I mean, how much money do I have within my budget? How much money can I get in additional funding if I need to? And perhaps the technologies that I want to put in place, we simply can't afford, and we might have to take some shortcuts. Shortcuts is kind of a harsh word. We don't want to take a shortcut. We might save people's lives, but we have to be
Right.
realistic that perhaps there's only a finite amount of funding available, and I can only afford this particular technology, and that's just unfortunately that's a reality of life, and a reality that people that work in the government, as mentioned, I was in the FBI, and I also understand funding issues, and we have to live within our budget, so that's something that's complicated. And then of course you have the additional complications of dealing. You have your constituents being the parents and the students, and
Mhm.
as you get technology, they have to accept the technology you're getting. Can you get them to believe that you're doing the right thing? Which your audience probably understands more about that aspect of than I do, but just understanding that is a real concern. And lastly, if you're running a large school district, it's kind of hard to incrementally, I would imagine, add technology to different schools, and to kind of test them out and see how they work, because you're facing pressure from other parents in other schools who are going to want to know, if you're putting it in one school, well, how come you're not putting it in the other schools? And that then, of course, compounds your budget concerns, because if you have a technology that are expected to be deployed across the entire school district, I would imagine relatively quickly. I guess I would add one more point, of course, is you as a school administrator or the person responsible for this may have to sort your way through numerous technologies and decide really which are the ones, even if I have the budget, which are the ones that I think I should buy. And I think that part of the way to answer that is if you just do an analysis of previous shootings, you can find out. I don't want to call out this context, specific technologies that I'm opposed to, but you can research and find out, well, in a particular that particular instance has never happened in a school shooting, so why would I add that particular
Right.
technology to my school? Whereas in every school shooting, something else has happened. So I think we can do make a rational decision as to what the best way to proceed, given the constraints, whatever constraints we may have within our budget.
And do you find that when you're talking to school leaders, they're informed with these things, or is that part of your process is informing in that consulting role?
Well, I think it really cuts both ways. I mean, clearly we've some of the heads of some school districts that we interact with have hired very experienced law enforcement or other professionals that have a fair amount of knowledge in this area, and that discussion is one type of discussion, and they still are happy to have us come in and help review their SOP and help review their education and just kind of talk through what the technologies are. In other school districts, frankly, they're just there isn't that much expertise, and they're listening to different people giving them different recommendations, and they're under pressure from their parents. So it's a wide variety of knowledge. But once again, I think in the end, we can fall back and look at, well, what happened in previous incidents, and why would this technology work versus that technology. And I think that's, if I was an administrator, I would absolutely recommend you consult with somebody who clearly has some expertise in this area. But you're going to navigate the salespeople who are just trying to, frankly, unfortunately, make money off of this, and you have to figure out who really has the knowledge. But the fallback, once again, is to look at history and see, well, what has history taught us, and why is this specific technology that perhaps it sounds like a really groundbreaking new technology, but if you think through it, well, wait a minute, that doesn't really seem to be something that would have helped in previous incidents. So why would I put that into my school? There's no simple answer to that question, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't envy the school administrators that have to make some of these decisions. There's a lot that weighs into it. And unfortunately, budget is always a concern with school districts and what they can do and where they have to move things around. So making the right decision for their students and the constituents and their community. I think I live in and everyone thinks it's, not going to happen to their nice town or whatever, right? I live in a very small town, and just to think about something like put in, like you were saying, like metal detector, like there's so many different scenarios, but like my first question is like, do we think our communities unsafe, or are students trying to bring in guns? Like, why are we putting in a metal detector? I mean, I think there's probably so many questions that come up from parents in the community when these decisions are made, and it's a tricky thing to navigate.
Right, and along those lines, I think you're absolutely right. And the counter point to that, or I don't know about counterpoint, but the opposite is sometimes parents will say, "Well, just do this, and because this is going to make our schools safer." For example, just put a metal detector in, and you as the administrator and your experts need to assess, well, is that really the best answer and the best use of my funds? And in some cases, maybe it would be, but do we have the right personnel to staff that metal detector? And once again, I think we may have discussed this earlier, but what happens when someone comes into school with a gun and they get detected at a metal detector? Well, do we have the right people to handle that situation at that point? So it's not like there's an easy answer. And I'm going to do a quick digress here slightly to talk about something that I didn't get into earlier. I don't want to break the flow. I think we have a good flow going here. But what I avoided saying from a technology standpoint is, so there are companies that are selling to schools technologies that either enhance door locks and or reinforced doors so you can't break doors down. That's like, to be the most obvious one. Why are you selling that to schools? Because no one has ever broken down a door in an active shooter situation. Now, if you're trying to sell to a corporate headquarters and say, well, we need to reinforce the CEO's door because someone might be coming after him, that makes sense. But in a school, it makes absolutely no sense.
Super interesting, and just a part of just like people being informed and not on and understanding the actual reasons behind certain things, or just like something may sound, well, what, yeah, we need that. Like, that sounds like really good. Why wouldn't we have something like that? But, then you go back and look, like, that's not really something that's gonna necessarily help make you safer, because that hasn't been in the history of what's happened in school shootings previously. So I think it's a really good point.
But that gets back to, so pivoting, and this is why I'm very proud of the solution that we developed, which is an active shooter alarm that runs like a fire alarm. And what's so important about it, it's got to work 100% of the time. It's got to work if the power goes out, if the school IT system goes down, if the Wi-Fi goes down, kind of like a fire alarm. It needs to work 100% of the time, and the system we built does that. And so part of the importance of that is whatever technology you put in, as we've kind of been talking about through our discussion today, might fail. Hopefully it will work, but there's a reasonable chance that somebody might get through with a metal detector, or for that matter, maybe somebody gets caught at the metal detector and unfortunately shoots their way through, or maybe they come in through a side exit, or who knows, maybe they've hidden a gun somehow, it came in through some other way. So what happens when that happens? And that's why the backup is, we need to have some type of active shooter alarm within your school, just like, as we've talked about before, you need to have a fire alarm.
Right. Like, that's why you have an SOP. So in case this, these are the protocols, and what happens next if this doesn't work, or this, like, because there's so many different scenarios that could happen. So then, given all this, Phil, if we look ahead at what innovations or new approaches we see on the horizon for safety in schools, are there emerging technologies or practices or changes in school design that you're excited about? Excited maybe is a tough word to use in this. I think you'd prefer, like, your technology never has to be used, and that would be a successful business. But anything that you can think of that in the next few years, as far as new technologies or AI being something that we could tap into here?
Well, I think, first of all, just, as we start looking in the future as to how we design our schools, and in many schools right now, it's understanding that, okay, access control is an issue. We need to have better access controls to how we get in schools. We need to understand, though, that if the best access control doesn't really work, if someone opens up a side door and lets somebody else in, or for that matter, if they're trying to sneak in because they're late and someone lets them in that way. So just building technology that allows us to identify when that door is open, what things we can do about it faster. But absolutely, AI is a potential exciting development, because if you think about everybody, it's a tough topic because privacy concerns kind of kick in. But if we could know what was going on with the school, and perhaps sense that, okay, for some reason 20 people in this one area of a school started running quickly, which we can have the technology to do that, we might know something serious is going on. Or for that matter, 5 people react in this one area, you might recognize that there's a fight going on. But if 100 people start running, you might know there's something very serious going on in this area. So, I think understanding technology, things like facial recognition, cameras, all these things add value. We just have to make sure, of course, we respect the privacy concerns of students and other individuals within the school. It's kind of a tough balancing act. And, law enforcement person in me always wants to push technology to the limit to try to save lives. But I clearly respect, as the concerns of people that want to also maintain privacy issues. So it's kind of a fine line there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you bring up some really interesting points on the use cases of AI, but of course, privacy is a huge thing with any ed tech or technology we implement, making sure students' data and all those things are accounted for. But I'm sure administrators also continue to think of, like, okay, these are great technologies, but, what's the additional cost and things like that, and where can we kind of work together to come up with these solutions? And maybe there's a cooperative approach in different districts or states that could work together on this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a balancing act. I don't envy the school administrators that have to make these tough decisions, but once again, balancing between budgets, between privacy concerns, between safety concerns, between parents, it's a tough line that they have to walk.
Absolutely. And so finally, you did touch on some of this already, but for the school leaders listening, if you could leave them with one actionable step to improve student safety in their schools right now, what would that be? Is there any practical first step or change that they could implement after listening to our conversation today?
Well, yes. I hope, and I hope that they realize that really, that unfortunately, this is the most significant threat that they faced for the safety of their students. It's no longer fires, because fires have been, technology's increased to the point that we don't really have to worry as much about fires. It's not to say we should just ignore that, but we need to really focus on that. So first thing would be to take one step, whatever it may be, to push yourself forward and take some action about that. And it might very well be as simple as taking a look at your SOP, and then taking a look at your training and identify, what in your SOP, if anything, needs to be changed. And then based on that review of the SOP, you may realize, okay, there's some particular technology that we can add that are within the within our funding restrictions, and we can afford to go ahead with that now. But, I really don't think that you should wait. I think we need to move ahead now. Frankly, it doesn't really matter whether you're in a high crime area or a low crime area. Unfortunately, as I'm sure most of our administrators are aware of, these school shootings occur in many different places, to include areas where you wouldn't expect there ever be a school shooting. That could be in a relatively remote area with a relatively small number of students, or they can be in schools in major urban areas. So just like nobody is safe from a fire could happen anywhere, and we've learned that, and we put systems in place. Well, a shooting can happen anywhere, and it doesn't have anything to do with what part of the United States you're in, or what your school district looks like, or what the crime is in that area. It's still a concern that everybody has to be worried about. And you really don't want to look back and say, oh, I wish I had done this. I had the capability to do it. So it's a tough situation. My hat's off to people who need to make these difficult decisions and figure out how can I most effectively move forward given whatever constraints I'm operating under. One step that you can take, and I do think that reviewing your standard operating procedures, reviewing your training, identifying whatever gaps there might be, and then from a funding standpoint, figure out what is it that I can do. But I strongly recommend that if you haven't done anything, that you make sure you at least do something, because you can't assume that you're going to be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fortunate reality that we're living in today. And just listening to folks at conferences and things I go to, all administrators I hear, number one thing and top concern is student safety and student health and well-being. So appreciate all the work that you do, Phil, at Lockdown Experts, and this is really great, informative conversation today. So thank you so much for your time. Any final thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, I appreciate you giving me the time to talk today. And I think the last thought I would just say is there is no one answer, unfortunately, for this problem. So if anyone comes and tries to tell you that, you need to be very suspicious of it. No matter what you do, there is going to be, you need to have multiple levels of protection, and to consider the fact that whatever I do, something bad might happen, and we need to have procedures in place for when that does happen, if it happens.
Well, appreciate it. Phil, huge thank you for the insights you shared with us today. Obviously, a super important topic. And for those of you that want to know more, I encourage you to check out the Lockdown Experts website. They're doing truly meaningful work in school safety. And a big thank you for everyone tuning in today.